Well, I think if everyone is settled in and logged on, we will go ahead and get started. I just want to start by thanking everyone for joining us this evening for this discussion on Senate Bill 72. Senate Bill 72 is a bill that aims to modernize electric transmission infrastructure. Before I introduce our speakers, I do want to briefly share some information on upcoming league events that we hope you'll participate in. Tomorrow evening at 5:30, we'll be joined by Senator Julie Gonzalez and Bruce Eisenhower with the Colorado Department of Local Affairs to discuss several pending bills regarding housing security. Thursday at 5, Sonia Ketting and other representatives from the Larimer League will conduct a program entitled News Literacy and U.S. Journalism. How can the League of Women Voters be a part of the solution? They'll talk to us about pending legislation at the state and federal levels and share a variety of resources with us. And then on April 21st at 5:30, Senator Faith Winter will discuss Senate Bill 199, removing barriers to certain public opportunities. All of these events are free and everyone is welcome, though we do require a registration. So please check out our website, lwvcolorado.org, for information on that. We encourage you to sign up for these discussions and we look forward to seeing you there. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for the evening. Both are extremely knowledgeable about energy sector issues and the subject matter of Senate Bill 72. They'll be sharing perspectives on the goals and anticipated outcomes of this legislation. And we are honored to be joined by our first speaker this evening, Senator Chris Hansen, who represents Senate District 31, which spans portions of Denver and Arapahoe counties. Senator Hansen specializes in energy sector economics and data analytics with 20 years of experience in the global energy industry. He's a member of the Joint Budget Committee and is chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator Hansen is one of the prime sponsors of Senate Bill 72. And our second speaker of the night is Bill Levis, who is a retired member of the Consumer Council in Colorado, and he's been a volunteer advocate, pro bono attorney, and witness on utility issues for AARP Colorado. He was the interim executive director of the National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates, as well as Assistant Attorney General of Colorado and Special Counsel to the Colorado Legislative Council. We'll hear from our speakers first, followed by an opportunity for questions and discussion. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Hansen.
All right, terrific. I'm wondering, Andrea, if you could make me a host. I was going to share a few slides, if that's all right. I find, and like many things in life, a picture can help tell a story in a much quick and succinct way.
Absolutely. I think that should do it. Go ahead and give that a try.
All right. All right.
Is it still not allowing you to share?
Doesn't look like it. Well, I can certainly go without, but just wanted to see if we can pull this off. All right.
I've made you, I was trying to do a co-host and now I made you the host, so I think you should be able to share now.
All right. Huh. I'm not seeing that option for some reason. Let me try one other thing. All right, I tell you what, let's do this the old-fashioned way. I'm seeing a wonderful mix of folks on tonight. I know many of you are very familiar with electricity issues. Some of you are not. And so let me see if I can, we'll do this without slides and just talk about the bill in kind of simplest terms and summary terms, and then we can slowly peel the onion back together as we get into some of the details. Senate Bill 72 has been brought forward by myself and Senator Don Coram. Senator Coram represents the Montrose area, kind of the southwest corner of Colorado. He's a Republican, been in the legislature a touch longer than I have. He was in the House like I was before coming to the Senate. And he has had a long-term interest in electricity issues, particularly because of some of the co-op issues in his part of the state and how Delta Montrose Electric Association, which I see ably represented tonight by Virginia. Thanks for being here tonight, Virginia. Has had a lot of changes over the last few years and its relationship with Tri-State. And transmission issues are so important for our electric co-ops around the state to be able to access different types of electricity and and to reduce their emissions at low cost. And so this is an issue that's been near and dear to Dawn and myself for a long time. Basically, what Senate Bill 72 does is kind of in three parts. Part number one is we're creating a clear process for new transmission projects to be evaluated and approved by the PUC as well as local governments. So we've set in the bill right now basically a 6-month clock for that to be evaluated at the state level, and then an additional 6-month clock for its evaluation at the county or local government level. So that provides a year total for new transmission projects to be vetted, evaluated, and either approved or denied by the respective commissions or local governments. The second thing that the bill does is it creates the Colorado Electricity Transmission Authority. And the CETA, for short, is set up to handle projects that the utilities can't or won't do. So there's a lot of places in the state, the southwest corner included, San Luis Valley, the southeast, there's many parts of the eastern plains where we do not have enough transmission right now to build out the new wind and solar projects that the state needs. And that is a long-term problem and one that needs to be addressed, particularly in areas where the utilities are not getting the job done. San Luis Valley is a great example of that. And without transmission, those areas of the state are not going to have the same economic development opportunities. And I kind of compare it to your town not being on the railroad back in 1880. If you didn't have access to transportation, your town was going to blow up and dry away. The same thing is happening right now for solar developers in places like the San Luis Valley, where they simply have no access to new transmission and they can't build any more additional projects, which means you don't get the jobs, you don't get the investment, you don't get the tax base in many parts of the state. And so the second part of the bill is designed to address that by creating an authority that would develop projects with other entities, other private developers. They partnered together to bring projects forward. They would have the same rights and responsibilities as the utilities do when they do projects. So they still have to go to the PUC. They still have to go through all the local approvals, but they can do the projects to fill in those gaps where the utilities aren't getting the job done. And I think this is going to have a really positive impact on getting adequate transmission and transmission that will lower costs for ratepayers over time, because you're going to be able to bring new wind and solar projects on more quickly. The third piece of the bill is a very simple one, which it just says that if there is a viable regional transmission organization, so having the Colorado operators be able to join in with our neighbors in the region to interconnect our grid more completely and trade more power, if that option is available, the operators need to join an RTO no later than 2030. So we're giving them about 9 years to evaluate all the options. All the interveners at the PUC will be able to weigh in. Everybody's going to be able to have their say and make their case. But if there's a viable option that makes sense for ratepayers and the PUC commission approves that option, then the operators need to move forward with membership. Now, and I think the RTO is really the long-term solution for the state of Colorado. And there's a couple of key advantages here. One, being inside of an RTO increases reliability over time. One of the big problems that we saw in Texas is that they had very little ability to move power back and forth between their neighbors. All they had were a few small DC interconnections that were relatively small compared to the size of the demand. And as a result, Texas is basically an island in the grid. Now, Colorado is not completely cut off from our neighbors, but we don't have a lot of capacity right now to share power in the region. And that is something that we need to improve. And an RTO is a great way to do that. And that is going to, over the time, increase reliability and more resiliency for the state of Colorado. The other important thing that an RTO does is it drastically lowers the cost of integrating new wind and solar. We know we need a lot more clean energy to reach our carbon goals. We're going to be shutting down the old fossil plants, in particular the coal plants, over the next few years. We're going to backfill that with a lot of additional wind and solar. And if we have an RTO, that's going to help us do it at a lower cost. And the other thing to keep in mind, and this is often kind of lost in the debate, is that if you have a smaller power grid, and right now the Western United States, this was the map I wanted to show you, is made up of 38 subgrids across the 11 Western states. 38 separate grids. That leads to huge amount of inefficiency. We need to be trading and sharing resources to lower costs for customers. And to give you a tangible example, the reserve margin right now, so the extra power that we have to create 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in Colorado, in the Excel system is about 16.5%. In most of the RTOs around the country, that's more like 11 or 12%. That means you don't need a bunch of extra power plants running all the time at ratepayer expense. Instead, you're sharing resources across the region. And that, I think, is going to have a huge long-term set of savings for ratepayers. In fact, the estimates are between $100 and $200 million a year just for the state of Colorado if we were to get into an RTO. So there are certainly costs associated with going this direction, but I believe the benefits far outweigh some of those costs. And over the long term, this is going to be a huge advantage for Colorado ratepayers, a big step forward as far as lowering emissions. And over time, we can avoid the reliability and resiliency problems that we saw in Texas. So that's what the bill does. Those are the policy aims. And really look forward to this discussion tonight. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. We really appreciate that perspective and those remarks. Again, I apologize about the slides. I'm not sure what's going on there, but if it's something that would be useful for us to share with our audience after the fact, please just email me and we'll make sure that everyone gets those. Before we turn to discussion and questions, I would like to give our secretary to say a few words about the issue and Senate Bill 72. With that, I'll hand it over to Bill Levis.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Senator Hansen. I'm going to be talking on behalf of AARP Colorado and talking about the third issue, the last issue that Senator Hansen talked about, which is the RTO issue. AARP has spoken out against this issue for a lot of reasons. And the first reason is we've had a lot of confusion about how Colorado may be or may not be like Texas. I can tell you that the energy grid in Colorado is nothing like Texas. As Senator Hansen said, Colorado is part of the 11-state Western Interconnect. While there may be 38 subgrids, there is an energy and balance market where we work out with the various areas in the West. And you have to realize that Excel, which is one of the two investor-owned utilities, has 1.5 million customers in Colorado, but they're in 8 states. Black Hills, which is the other investor utility with 100,000 customers in Pueblo, is also in 8 states. And Tri-State, which provides power to many of the rural electric associations, is in 4 states. I love the fact they're called Tri-State, but they're in 4 states, but that's neither here nor there. You have to realize, as Senator Hansen said, Texas is an island that deregulated its electricity 20 years ago. Its energy meltdown in February was its second in 10 years, and it was warned to fix it, and it had failed to do so. Colorado, on the other hand, has the Public Utilities Commission, which regulates the 2 investor utilities pursuant to our state constitution. As a result, and unlike in Texas, when we had the cold snap in February, when we had the snow in March, our wind turbines had heaters, our pipelines were buried sufficiently, and our power plants were insulated against the bitter cold. When Texas had the blackout during the bitter cold, Colorado's utilities continued to work very well. The same was true, as I said, during our blizzard. However, the RTOs that Senator Hansen was talking about went through blackouts in a number of their states. 2 years ago, the Colorado General Assembly adopted Senate Bill 236, which then Representative Hansen co-sponsored, which called on the PUC to study if it made sense for our electric utilities to join an energy imbalance market or an RTO. The PUC will issue that report in December of this year after spending $500,000 to do so. But even before that report had been written, the legislature is now considering Senate Bill 72, which would mandate, and you have to read the language in the bill that was approved on second reading today, would mandate RTO membership by 2020. Clearly, in our mind, there's no need to rush. Let's see what the PUC does. And then maybe next year or the year after it makes sense, consider joining an RTO. And I can tell you that because of what has been going on, let's give the PUC a chance. You have to realize that Colorado, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, had the third lowest bills for electricity in 2019. And in 2020, we continue to have rates that are below average. The question then is why legislators want to hand over regulatory authority to an RTO made up of more than 10 states that will tell Colorado what to do, especially when the states of Connecticut, Illinois, Maryland, and New Jersey are considering leaving their RTOs because they don't see the benefits in paying for power in other states. Presently, the Colorado PUC, whose 3 members are appointed by the governor with the approval of the state Senate, determine the just and reasonable rates in Colorado. Assuming Colorado joins an RTO, that responsibility would be turned over to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which historically has allowed higher rates with less oversight. There also would be more costs for our PUC and its staff to attend the hundreds of meetings that RTOs have every year. Senate Bill 72 would allow utilities to charge ratepayers for that cost. So the rates would go up because of all those additional meetings. And then there would be the addition of unsightly transmission lines across our state to other states, especially if we joined an RTO to the east. With our PUC studying whether joining an RTO makes sense, the last thing we need to do is rush to judgment, especially when it would require joining an RTO by January 1st, 2030. The only exception to utilities joining an RTO, defined it as an organized wholesale market, other than for municipalities, are found in Section 2 of the bill that passed on second reading in the Senate today. That bill states specifically, upon application by a transmission authority utility, the commission may waive or delay the requirement to join an RTO if the commission has determined that the transmission utility has made all reasonable efforts to comply with the requirements, but there is no viable or available OWM, that's an RTO, that the transmission utility could join by January 1st, 2030. And the commission has determined, based on the study conducted in accordance with the law we talked about previously, that requiring the transmission utility to join an RTO is not in the public interest. So they would have to do it unless they meet those exceptions. The other thing that's interesting is that the study that is referenced in Senate Bill 72 and the authority of the commission is explicitly repealed by Senate Bill 236 as of September 1st, 2022. So that law wouldn't even be in effect in 2030. In addition, the language in the bill as adopted today is contrary to the bill's summary that says the PUC may waive or delay the requirement if a utility is unable to find a viable RTO to join, or if the commission finds it would not be in the public interest. In the bill that was passed today, there's an and instead of an or. So based on those concerns and everything else I've said previously, we think it is premature to have the language concerning the RTO. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bill. We appreciate that perspective and the information that you provided with that provided to us. I'd like to open it up now to some questions. I do see that there's at least one in the chat already. If you're most comfortable entering questions into the chat, please feel free to do that. But I would also encourage you to just go ahead and unmute and ask of our speakers directly if you're inclined to do that. Maybe to kick things off with the question in the chat so that doesn't get overlooked. From Carol Pace, we have some thoughts expressed about older adults being susceptible to loss of utilities, brownouts, blackouts, homebound seniors with medical conditions that have equipment that needs to be charged, including wheelchairs, dialysis equipment, all that sort of thing. Moving into telehealth, where reliable connections are also critical. Is this the best model to guarantee health and safety? Would love some commentary on that from our speakers.
Yeah, Carol, thank you for the question. I think our experience with RTOs across the country has shown that over time that they do increase reliability. And I think that's one of the important undergirding conclusions that was reached by the National Academy of Sciences in its February 25th report that it released just a few weeks ago. The same conclusion was reached by NREL. The same conclusion was reached by the MIT study that was published a couple of years ago. And the same conclusion was reached by the Western Interstate Electricity Board in its 2019 study. The other important conclusion is that not only is reliability enhanced, but you also get significant savings. Mr. Levis mentioned the energy imbalance market that is underway. We have commitments from Xcel and other Colorado operators to join that in 2022 and 2023. They're not currently in it, but they're planning to join. And Xcel has released figures that basically indicate that the energy imbalance market would produce about 1.9 million in savings compared to the studies that show that an RTO would produce $100 to $200 million in savings for ratepayers in Colorado. So I think there's a big difference in long-term reliability, and I think there's a big difference in cost savings for customers if we move this direction. And those are a couple of the main reasons that I've brought forward the bill.
Well, if I could respond, I think the evidence that I just talked about indicates something totally differently. When we had the cold snap in February, Southwest Power Pool had to do brownouts in at least Oklahoma. There were brownouts in Mississippi, in at least another couple of other states. As I indicated, Colorado has among the lowest rates in the country right now, and states with higher rates such as Illinois and Maryland and New Jersey and Connecticut are talking about leaving their RTOs. So I don't see how joining an RTO would necessarily benefit us. And what I'm really concerned about it in this bill is if you read it carefully, it mandates that we join an RTO in 2030. Why is there a rush? Let's see what the PUC finds. Let's review what happened around the country in February before we rush to judgment. As far as the other two sections of the bill, AARP doesn't have a problem with those. It's this one section of the bill dealing with having to join an RTO that we're concerned about. And you have to realize there have only been RTOs for 20 years. And now you're getting the feedback that the RTOs are maybe not the best thing for various states.
Senator Hansen, I would welcome any comments or thoughts.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, I appreciate Mr. Levis, reading off some of the bill language. It passed on second reading in the Senate today. I'm expecting to pass it out of the Senate tomorrow and over to the House by the end of the day tomorrow. I think it's important to recognize that the study that he's referencing is put in motion by a bill I sponsored in 2019. That study will be completed in May of this year. So we're just a few weeks away from getting Siemens' report on different RTO and EIM options for the state. That's an important baseline for the ongoing discussion that will happen at the PUC with interveners like the AARP and others who will comment over the next 9 years. And the PUC has to find that not only is there a viable option, but it has to be in ratepayer interest before there is a requirement to join an RTO. So I want to be very clear about that. The bill is very clear about that. The PUC has the responsibility, as we have given them in the Constitution, to make sure that ratepayers are protected. And we've maintained that important principle in this bill. And so I felt it was important to have a clear timeline for consideration of an RTO. That's what we've done in the bill, but we still have maintained those important consumer protections.
Well, I must tend to disagree with what Senator Hansen is saying about how an RTO would be implemented. If you read the bill specifically that was passed today, it says, except as otherwise provided in subsection 2A2 of the section, and except for municipalities, all Colorado transmission utilities shall, which is the same as must, join an organized wholesale market, which is an RTO, on or before January 1st, 2030. He has flipped it to say only if they meet these things would they join an RTO. That's not what the bill says is passed today. I think you need to read your own bill, Senator Hansen.
I'm quite familiar with my own bill. Thank you, Mr. Levis.
Well, it doesn't say what you just said it said.
Well, I think to make sure that we give everyone that's participated in an opportunity to get some questions in, I do want to turn back to another question that's in our chat. From Carol Howe, we have, how would joining an RTO reduce vulnerability of the grid being susceptible to hacking for Senator Hansen? And the reverse of the question is posed to Bill Levis. Would an RTO increase vulnerability?
Well, I would say we've got several levels of analysis here. There are organizations like NERC, which is National Electricity Reliability Council, that works on this across the country. The DOE has a whole section at the federal level that supports utilities and co-ops across the country on cyber attacks and physical attacks. RTOs add one more layer to that. I've had the chance to visit the SPP, which is the Southwest Power Pool, had a chance to visit their headquarters in Arkansas. They have a whole team dedicated to this. And so I see the RTOs as actually enhancing our ability to respond and prevent cyber attacks and hacking on the grid, because it adds an extra level on top of what we currently have, which is the individual operators working with the DOE and organizations like NERC. And that's what I was am familiar with from the SPP experience.
Well, and I would say if tying everything together the way Senator Hansen was talking about would mean that if there were an attack, they could take down the whole system more easily than if there were more firewalls between the various utilities in the various states. At the same time, clearly, the utilities in Colorado are in organizations such as WEC, which is the Western NERC, basically, in coordinating with other states. So it's not as if Colorado is an island, unlike Texas, but every time you put more and more together, you have, I think, a greater chance of a larger hack. I mean, so you can argue the issue both ways.
All right, well, thank you both for your commentary on that. I would like to just make a request that if anybody's got questions, please feel free to ask directly. Take advantage of our speakers being here to answer questions. The chat is fine, but I just want to make sure that we're switching back and forth and giving people the opportunity to phrase their own question and not be subject to my paraphrasing. So please feel free to unmute and ask away.
I'm interested in how this segues with ensuring that we have overall a just transition. Because I think one of the issues here is that some utilities, Tri-State is the infamous Colorado example, are saddled with what are going to very rapidly be stranded assets. I'm a member of the AARP, and I think one of the issues that I would see behind an AARP objection to this is that normally what we try to talk about is saving, not hitting ratepayers with these kind of hits of the excess payments that are due for things that we don't need anymore. But AARP has a big insurance and retiree interest. And in fact, most utility bonds and stocks are owned by pension funds and in income mutual funds that individual retirees have. So it's not true that retirees are insulated from that. And I think that is one of the questions as to how we do this, because sure, I live in Longmont. Longmont's sitting fairly pretty with Platte River Power Authority. We're moving towards renewables faster than many, and we have a good rate-based system. But that doesn't mean that I should be ignoring the fact that people stuck on tri-state are not in that situation. So how does this?
Yeah,
how
I
does-
think Tri-State has done a very poor job, frankly, of handling
Right.
just transition. I think Nucla, unfortunately, in the West Slope is a perfect example. That coal plant was shut down by Tri-State. Tri-State as a company provided almost nothing in the way of transition assistance. Their foundation did provide $500,000 in charitable giving to Nucla to help with that. That to me is inadequate. And it was one of the main factors that motivated me to run Senate Bill 236. It started off as House Bill 1037 in 2019, because I thought we needed a clear set of tools to address the just transition issue. We know these coal plants are closing down. The oldest ones are going to be closing down in the next few years. Some of the younger ones, in particular, the third unit in Pueblo that Excel owns, probably has a few more years on it. But we know we are done with coal. The age of coal is rapidly coming to an end. It's coming to an end, not just because of the massive pollution that it creates, but because of the high cost. And so I want to go directly to your question. We're closing down these fossil plants because they are more expensive than the alternative.
Mhm.
The marginal cost of coal plants in Colorado is between $32 and $38 per megawatt hour. We are getting wind and solar contracts now on a long-term basis that are less than 20. So it is a massive savings to move to clean energy, not to mention you get rid of all the carbon emissions that right now, unfortunately, don't have a proper price on them. So to the other part of your question, what do we do about the folks that are affected by these closures, by these retirements of these old units? That is the just transition piece. And so in Senate Bill 236, we created a securitization, a bonding mechanism that allowed those stranded assets to be bonded, meaning you turn them into very low interest rate corporate bonds. Those are paid back over 20 or 30 years. And you use the savings that you generate from that transaction to then provide direct assistance to workers and the communities where you have plant retirements. First time that has been done in Colorado. We need to make sure we have clear funding for the just transition work. And I think the solution presented in Senate Bill 236 was a really innovative way to do that, saving ratepayer money, sharing part of the savings that's generated by that transaction to then help the workers in the towns that are being left behind, and make sure we do not have another Nucla and never let that happen again in the state of Colorado.
If I could respond, a couple things. When you talk about coal and RTOs, Southwest Power Pool now is more than 50% coal. So if you join them, it may not be coal in Colorado, but it'd be coal in other states. You also had one of the owners of Comanche 3 indicate one of the reasons they wanted to join an RTO is they would use Comanche 3, which is a coal plant that Senator Hansen talked about, to provide power in other states, but that would still generate pollution in Pueblo. When Comanche 3 was approved by the PUC in the early 2000s, it was given a useful life until 2070. According to the Colorado Sun today, it will be closed in 2040, and that consumers will have to pay the $1.4 billion, and that was the low end, to retire that plant. The fact that Excel is retiring that plant early, I really feel should be a cost of doing business and should be put on Excel in addition to ratepayers, because one of the things that was in Senate Bill 236 in 2019 was allowing the commission to put a surcharge on consumer bills, I think up to 1.5% until 2030, to pay for the phase down of these coal plants. Then if Excel and Black Hills had not been reimbursed fully for the cost of retiring those plants, it could be put into base rates. So consumers end up paying for it. So to getting to your question, there's got to be a way to do this that doesn't put all of the burden on consumers for what utilities asked the Public Utilities Commission to approve and now is asking to retire early. And that's a concern that ARP has for all of its constituents and for all the constituents in the state. And I do appreciate that there are other bills to deal with low income who are impacted unjustly by increases in electric bills, but it affects everybody. And I think the utilities should have some skin in the game as well. And at the moment, everything is being put on the back of ratepayers.
But I don't see how you think that is helped by not having an RTO.
How does an
Other than there are
RTO deal with that?
certain special utilities, and I'm in one, which are privileged. And you have, I really am suspicious that the IRP's interest in this has to do with being an investor as much as it does, because there is no such thing as putting it on the utility except for the CEO pay. Everything else is investors, and investors is pretty distributed.
Well, I can tell you, when the telecom industry received some competition back in the 1980s, the Bell system had to write down billions and billions of dollars of old plant because of new technology.
Mhm.
Now, to your point, that's going to be in some part on the shareholders of the companies, but instead it's being put on the backs of all of the ratepayers.
But who are the shareholders? Retirees. That's my
Well,
point.
they're not all
Pension funds.
retirees. They're not all
Pension funds.
retirees, but so it's a decision that has to be made. But I understand what you're saying about who you put it on. But if you put it on all ratepayers, it wasn't the ratepayers who made the decision to build these coal plants.
Right.
It was the utility.
So it shouldn't matter if you're a tri-state customer or a Longmont Power Line customer.
Well, the thing that's interesting there too, unfortunately, the PUC has very limited jurisdiction over tri-state because REAs are not regulated by the PUC.
Actually, we greatly expanded PUC oversight of Tri-State in Senate Bill 236. They now have to submit their electric resource plans, which means their future portfolio will have oversight from the PUC. That is a brand new thing we brought in 2019 to try to address those past mistakes.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that. I mean, there were past mistakes, and that was done both with Tri-State and with the predecessor of Black Hills, and of course with Excel. And Black Hills is a whole story on its own, because when they bought Aquila down in Pueblo, Excel chose not to provide energy for them. So Black Hills had to build natural gas plants. And that is a whole nother topic.
Unfortunately, we do not have time to get into another topic this evening. We're kind of coming to the end of our time. And I do want to just make sure that I'm not neglecting the chat. I know there's probably, well, definitely more questions coming in than we have time for. But just to make sure we get some of these, Virginia Harmon submitted a comment. She is saying, as a spokesman from DMEA, an electric cooperative serving rural Colorado, I'd like to note that DMEA fully supports Senate Bill 72 and appreciates Senator Hansen and Senator Quorum for leading this effort. I want to point everyone's attention to a resource that Kelly Fritz has dropped into the chat that you can copy the link there and take a look at. And then maybe just a final question from Mary Fries. How does this RTO model handle both disasters and peak demands?
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the case I'm making tonight, Mary, is that RTOs over time increase your ability to handle extreme situations, disasters, extreme weather events. And I think extreme demand, a really hot summer's day, we can share resources with our neighbors in a way we can't now. And I should point out, the build out of new wind and solar across the region, the greening of our electricity grid is greatly benefited from being able to share resources across the region, time zones, and different types of resources. Wind and solar actually fit together pretty well, because the wind blows pretty hard at night, and of course the sun's out during the day. you get the added benefit of, if you're sharing with Arizona, it might be sunny there and less sunny here, and you can share back and forth. So there's a great portfolio effect that's enhanced when you're in an RTO. And that's one of the key ways that savings are generated for ratepayers over time if you're in a regional grid.
I guess
Well, I think you can also do that with an energy imbalance market. And as Senator Hansen knows, right now, the RTOs basically are east of us with Southwest Power Pool, with MISO, which is the Midwest RTO, and also with JPM. So, I mean, the problem is the West doesn't have really RTOs the way you do in the East. In addition, Colorado is working through these issues with smart metering. If you're an Excel customer, later this year, they're going to be installing smart meters, and there will be peak pricing to dampen the peak. So we shouldn't have the problems that you saw in Texas for other reasons. So, I mean, there's a lot going on that can be accomplished without an RTO. And all I'm asking is, before we have a bill requiring RTOs by 2030, that we give the PUC a chance to issue its report by December, and then we look at this issue. To require an RTO by a date certain at this time, in my mind, and on behalf of ARP Colorado, doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
my follow-up to that question is, if Colorado is doing well with the big cold snap and these RTOs are having blackouts or rolling blackouts, why do we want to get involved with an RTO that's going to take power away from Colorado deciding its own utilities rates, and having the PUC oversee our utilities rather than having the federal, the FERC, I guess, is it the FERC?
So I want to be clear about that, because FERC sets the transmission rates if you're in an RTO, but the PUC still has authority over the portfolio decisions in the state. And you do not lose the ability to have state energy policy at the front of your decision making. That doesn't go away with an RTO. In fact, it just gets easier, because if you set yourself a high target for decarbonization, an RTO helps you get there at lower cost. So I think state policy and an RTO fit together really nicely. And that has been demonstrated in many other states. Those are not in conflict.
But how does Colorado protect its own policies and its, our own benefit when we're one of many states belonging to an RTO? It seems like we're going to be giving a lot of power away at a cost. And I'm concerned about ratepayers having to have increased costs. You said that this is going to cost, but you think the benefits outweigh the negatives. But you also said there might be some private organizations helping in the rural areas to get this transmission across our state. So if private companies are coming in and they're going to want their profits, and we're going to be in this RTO and having expenses, not only building into it, but having to participate it, I don't see how ratepayers are going to see any savings. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Mary. I will need to make that one the last one, but Senator Hansen, I just want to give you an opportunity to respond, and then we'll close out. I do want to be respectful of people's time.
Yeah, great. Well, I just want to say thank you for this discussion tonight. I'm really pleased to be with you and to have a chance to talk about this important bill and a very important topic for the state of Colorado. We are making multi-billion-dollar decisions right now about the future of the power system in the state of Colorado. And, I think we've got a procedure set up at the PUC to do this in a thoughtful way. And we've got, many years to evaluate our options. And I think that's the prudent course. I guess what I would say to Mary is that I think we have strong evidence from the studies that I cited earlier, MIT, National Academy of Sciences, NREL, all coming to the same conclusion that RTOs over time save customers on net. Absolutely, I want to recognize that there are costs associated with joining an RTO. That's absolutely true, but there are also hundreds of millions of dollars in savings for ratepayers, because you are accessing the lowest cost electricity in the region. You are sharing resources instead of having to have lots of power plants running all the time, with that extra backup power. Instead, you're sharing those resources. So all of those things add up to significant savings for the ratepayer. And that's exactly what we're making the case in front of the PUC. If they come to the same conclusion by 2030, then we go forward. If they don't, we don't. The ratepayers are still protected. So appreciate the discussion tonight. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate you both being here. Thank you, Senator Hansen. Thank you, Bill, for joining us. There are several thank yous in the chat that I just want to draw your attention to. We know this is a complex issue with a lot of diversity of opinion on how to approach it, and we really appreciate you helping us think that through. And thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you tomorrow night for our housing discussion, and just want to wish you all a good evening.